planted in the Aisenberg's kitchen and bedroom were transcribed by prosecutors, publicized, and presented to a federal grand jury, which indicted the Aisenbergs on charges of conspiracy and making false statements. But in a scathing legal opinion released several weeks ago, a U.S. magistrate ordered to review the actual contents of the tapes as opposed to the transcripts made by the police and prosecutors, but reviewing the actual tapes themselves. The magistrate announced that what the cops said that the tapes say was either a terrible mistake or an outright lie. According to Magistrate Mark Pizzo, the recordings were actually worthless, barely audible conversations that proved nothing, transcribed in a highly misleading way. Furthermore, the magistrate virtually accused the two lead detectives in the case, Linda Sue Burton and William Blake, of a frame-up, something the Aisenbergs have claimed since the beginning of this bizarre and painful story. Before we speak with Steve and Marlene, first of all, welcome to the program. I'm glad you both could join us. Well, before I go to the background report, you must be tremendously relieved, are you not, Marlene?
You know, it's not a feeling of a tremendous relief. For sure, for William and Monica, knowing that we're not going to be taken away from them is definitely a relief. But there is no victory here until Sabrina comes home. And what we need is help getting her picture out. And that's why we're here, to do this type of show, to get her age progression picture out so that people can look for a 3.5-year-old little girl instead of, like the police did, look for a body.
Okay, here on your left, obviously, Sabrina, an actual photograph near the time the child was snatched or whatever the hell happened in November of 1997. And with computer-enhanced age progression, the photograph on your left, or the rendering on your left, is what the experts tell us the child would look like today. On your right, I'm sorry. All right, now let's go. Before I go to that report, Steve, I just wonder how you feel about the fact that so many people will always suspect you regardless now of what the magistrate has done.
You know, people are going to have their suspicions. People are going to have their own opinions. But when the minions of mediocrity get together, greatness suffers. In other words, the going beyond the box and believing the facts and not just conclusions which are spewed out by authorities. And I think it's important that people do look for a 3.5-year-old little girl. She is out there. The police from day one accused us. Day two, they searched for a body and continued to follow their path of preconceptions and ignoring the facts.
Okay, here, now, this background report from NBC's Kerry Sanders.
Come on, you pretty girl.
It was more than 3 years ago when little Sabrina Aisenberg disappeared. For most of that time, a cloud of suspicion over her parents. But they were never charged with murder. Steve and Marlene Aisenberg were charged in an obscure federal indictment of conspiracy to make false statements to authorities. But lacking evidence, a federal judge dismissed those charges. From the beginning, the Aisenbergs said,
all we know is we went to bed one night and the next morning we woke up and our daughter was gone.
But detectives say the evidence did not add up. The house alarm not set, the garage door left open. Unusual in this quiet suburban Tampa neighborhood. The Aisenbergs on the Today Show 3 years ago, denying involvement.
We know we had absolutely nothing to do with this.
The search for Sabrina, police say, perhaps the largest investigation of its type ever in the state of Florida. In the beginning, 100 deputies working this case, more than 20 officers assigned to a task force. Today, there are still 5 investigators working this case full-time. A special prosecutor appointed to the case by Florida's governor to solve a different and perhaps more troubling mystery. Were Sabrina's parents improperly targeted by police? Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Miami.
Steve and Marlene Aisenberg join us from Washington, D.C. And now to their supporters, they've been living through 2 living hells, the agonizing disappearance, apparent murder of their baby daughter, and then the malignant suspicion that they actually committed the brutal crime themselves and seem to have walked away, have gotten away from it. Were you, Steve, framed by authorities down there in Hillsborough County?
I believe we were targeted by authorities, and then through the prosecution feeding lies and misleading a grand jury, we were thus indicted by them. I believe they had a preconception from day one as to what they thought happened, and they ignored all the facts to the exclusion of the truth. They weren't searching for the truth. They were searching to solve a case.
Let me play you now. Have that tape, E. I want to play you a bit of the 911 audio tape, Marlene. Now, this tape has been enhanced by Anthony Pellicano, who's an ace private eye working out on the West Coast, but in this case, he was working with the U.S. Attorney's Office on your case. Now, listen to part of the audio tape. Roll tape E.
My wife put her to bed. Hold on. And she's on the other phone going hysterical. Mar, what was Sabrina wearing when you put her to bed last night?
Hold on, I gotta go.
She's going to go get the...
I have a deputy on the way.
Thank you. She was wearing a onesie which had flowers, and we have a matching pair of pants still here.
Was the garage door open?
Yes, it apparently was.
Is she going to be okay?
I have no idea.
Is the baby a male or female?
It's a young girl.
A white female?
Yes, 5 months old.
What's her name?
Sabrina Page.
Now, Marlene Pellicano, who, obviously working for the U.S. Attorney's Office, believes that much of your tone and tenor seems orchestrated for history, for the recording that you knew would be made. Almost an acting job. He points to the fact that when you're talking about the child, you're screaming hysterically, and then you say to your mother at one point in the conversation on the other line, "I gotta go, Mom," in a more calm voice. Obviously, there's no smoking gun that indicates that you were being disingenuous or that you were perpetrating a fraud. But there is, in at least Pellicano's opinion, and obviously the police and prosecutors in Hillsborough County's opinion, the appearance that your behavior was contrived. I don't necessarily agree, but I wonder how you respond to that.
How I respond to that is basically the same way that Judge Pizzo responded to that. And he said, after listening to the tape several times, I find the affiant's opinions are unreasonable and made with reckless disregard for the truth. Marlene Aisenberg is not calm or collected while talking to her mother. She is wailing. And I just think that they went in with that preconceived notion from the beginning, and they stuck to it. They weren't going to listen to what was really on that tape because they already had their minds made up no matter what that tape said.
So you believe that they had you targeted right from day one? Right
from day one. On day one, they looked at me and they said, "We believe you know where your daughter is or what happened to her." And on day two, they looked for a body, and they continued to look for a body.
Barry Cohen, attorney for the Aisenbergs, what to you is the single most egregious action performed or committed by either police or prosecutors in this case?
Well, the fact that they just lied on innocent people to try to make a case. And what
you say they flat out lied.
Well, I didn't say it. Judge Pizzo said it. Judge Pizzo heard several weeks of testimony, and these people were on the stand for several days. And he concluded that they deliberately lied, that they showed a reckless disregard for the truth. Their conclusions were baseless, and that they would take innocent statements and twist them into something sinister and say they could hear things which were inconsistent with common sense and basic human experience. These were not my words, Geraldo. These were Judge Pizzo's words, who's a well-respected jurist in this community, and he was, as you say, outraged at this conduct.
Nancy Grace, we just heard from Barry Cohen, the ace attorney for the Aisenbergs. We like to give cops and DAs the benefit of the doubt, but in this case, it really does seem as if they bent over backwards to make a case against this couple.
Well, Geraldo, right off the bat, when they come to the home, there are a lot of suspicious circumstances, so I don't really blame them for suspecting the parents. But what concerns me is that one judge, Geraldo, can overturn what an entire grand jury has decided. What, as you said earlier, hundreds of police and investigators have found. One judge, instead of this going to a jury so they can listen to the tapes like the grand jury
wait a second,
did.
Nancy, here's what the judge says. Here's an example. All right, now, talking about a lie detector test. Allegedly, Marlene says to Steve, according to the prosecutors, you said to fake it? That's the question. Judge Pizzo, listening to the same tape, said, instead of "you said to fake it,"
The grand jurors heard
the real quote is, "you spoke to David." Now, it would seem to me that the judge has no dog in this fight. He listens to it. He's a reasonable guy. How could they write down on the transcript, "you said to fake it," when the judge thought he said, "you spoke to David"? You know, if you have that kind of ambiguity, how can you put it in a transcript and present it to a grand jury as if it were gospel truth?
In my mind, I would fall back on what we call the Constitution, Geraldo. We are supposed to be judged by a jury of our peers, not by a single judge and his ability to throw out literally months of testimony before that grand jury. And speaking of the lie detector tests, I'd like to find out why Ms. Eisenberg got an inconclusive mark on her first two. Why she didn't pass her lie detector test.
All right, well, she will have ample opportunity to respond to that. I must take a break. We're also joined tonight by Mark Klass, the renowned victims' rights advocate. Mark, of course, got into this area in the worst possible way by losing his own beautiful young daughter. We'll talk to Mark, who has his own suspicions about the Aisenbergs. I must say, regardless of what I think about the Aisenbergs, I am absolutely appalled by, if the judge is correct, and these prosecutors down there did to these people what the judge says they did, then they really, you'll see some indictments of some law enforcement people pretty quick. Hollow victory is what the Aisenbergs are calling this. Why? Because they don't have their daughter back. That's our title, our focus. Back in a flash, folks. Stay tuned.
I can't even describe what I'm going through. I mean, my heart is just, it just aches so bad. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything but think about them. And I just want to hug them so bad and tell them I love them and I'm praying for them. I just had to get the Lord to protect them and don't let anything happen to them.
We're very much in need her to come home. We don't care who you are. Please, drop her someplace safe.
A tale of two mothers going through the most horrifying nightmare you can imagine a mother going through. In the first case, though, it was all a fraud because Susan Smith, in 1994, revealed to be the actual murderer of her own two small children. Marlene Aisenberg, on the other hand, a woman who may not be cleared in the cosmic sense, but certainly in the literal, immediate sense. Barry Cohen, what is their legal status now? Are they cleared? Is the investigation vis-a-vis the Aisenbergs now closed? What's the status?
Well, the indictment, of course, has been dismissed, and as far as I'm concerned, they're totally been exonerated. There's absolutely no evidence. There was no evidence whatsoever, Geraldo, to support this claim. There was no physical evidence. They cooperated with the police, giving them blood, giving them fiber, giving them hair, giving them everything that the police wanted. There's absolutely no evidence to support, no physical evidence, no testimonial evidence.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
They refused to testify in front of a grand jury. They took the Fifth Amendment. They would not
cooperate
with the grand
Nancy.
jury.
That's not evidence.
But he just said they did everything police wanted them to do. Why didn't they testify in front of the grand jury?
You know, Geraldo, there's also the Marlene's very...
Let's bring Mark Klass just before we get there. One more on this legal point. But Nancy, if indeed the judge is right about the police and prosecutors bending over backwards, bending the rules, maybe even breaking the rules to make a case against these people, it would seem to me that maybe Barry Cohen was extremely prudent not to allow his clients to go before that grand jury.
I guarantee you, if I were in trouble, I would get Mr. Cohen's phone number. There's no doubt about that. He's a great lawyer. But to represent that these two did everything within their power to bring their girl back, I disagree, because you don't... Look at Mark Klass. He begged to be hooked up to a polygraph. He testified, grand jury, you name it. No Fifth Amendment. He wanted his child back. These two took the Fifth. They did not want to subject themselves to questions, and I wonder why.
Okay, Mark, why don't you amplify?
Oh,
go ahead, Barry, if you want to respond.
Let me answer that. Listen, we didn't testify before the federal grand jury because we knew the history of the prosecutor in that case, Stephen Kuntz. Mr. Kuntz had been described by the courts in Florida as so irresponsible in handling a grand jury that for him to be permitted to handle a grand jury would be like giving a child a loaded gun without instructions on how to use it. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. That's the first thing. Secondly, they had talked to the police 8 to 10 times before I got involved and after I became involved. They were setting up a perjury trap. And I told the prosecutors before that grand jury, I said, look, if you really want to speak to Marlene and Steve Aisenberg, get a tape recorder out and take their statement with a tape recorder. They'll talk to you as long as you want to speak to them. They refused to talk to them with a tape recorder. Why? Because they couldn't set that perjury trap.
So you're saying testifying in a grand jury was a perjury?
Mark Klass is a man who originally believed the Aisenbergs. Do you still, Mark?
You know, you're right, Geraldo. I did originally believe the Aisenbergs, and it's on the public record that I was defending them in the first few weeks of this incident. However, as questions were raised and those questions were not adequately answered, and even more questions were piled on top of those, I too became a doubter. Now, I think we have to
hold it there on the doubter. You two became a doubter.
Yes.
Mark Klass.
Yes.
Let me, on that note, take a quick break. We'll come back to Mark and our other guests. The intriguing and very disturbing case of the Aisenbergs, whose daughter Sabrina disappeared in 1997, continues right after this short intermission.
You don't have any family that might have came in?
No, we don't. We have my mother-in-law lives in downtown Tampa, or in New Tampa. William, I want you to walk through the whole house and look under everything in case she got out of the crib, which you can't do. But I want you to walk through the whole house, room by room, and look, turn on all the lights.
Before I get back to Mark Klass for his reasons on why he no longer believes or has suspicions about the Aisenbergs, Stephen, in that excerpt of the 911 tape, you asked your 8-year-old William to see if the child got out of the crib at 5 months. Obviously, she couldn't do that. But you say, which she can't do, on the tape as if an aside. That's so obvious. Pelicano says it indicates that you're kind of reading a script or have rehearsed it. Why would you say to your 8-year-old, look in the crib and see if she got out of the crib, which she can't do, and then continue, you know, if you care to address that specific, that's one of the points they raise.
I have no idea why I said that. It was something I just said. You know, I'm in shock. I don't know. I'm trying to think of everything that could possibly have occurred, why she isn't in her crib where she belongs. There are a couple points that I just wanted to touch upon that these other people brought up. First of all, concerning a grand jury, basically a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich. And our attorney, through the tenor of the conversation that was directed towards us by the police and prosecution, felt it in our best interest not to answer at that time. We did, though, go to the police prior to the grand jury and up until the grand jury, saying we would like to meet with you, we would like to talk to you, answer any questions with you as long as our attorney or tape recorder is present. And they continued to refuse that. Also, Geraldo, I think it's a little bit of an injustice of you to have on the bottom of the screen who killed Sabrina. We don't believe Sabrina is dead. And to have that, I'm very offended that you have that had that across the bottom of your screen on this show.
All right, that's a good point. How do you know, in the first 911 call, Marlene is, and I'm not your adversary here, Stephen, but in the 911 call, Marlene says, my daughter's been kidnapped. These people point out that there was no ransom note. Why would you suggest kidnapping rather than some more heinous, violent crime, or that the child was in a more benign circumstance?
Well, first of all, she was 4.5 months old. She wasn't of an age where she could have gotten out of her crib and walked out of the house. So the thinking, at least I can't speak for my wife, but my thinking was somebody had to have taken her.
Geraldo, if somebody had to have taken that child, and in fact Marlene did call 911 and say her baby had been kidnapped, how in God's earth can you ask an 8-year-old child to then do a search of the house when that kidnapper may be within the the premises. I mean, this is insanity. This whole thing is insanity. Let's look a minute here at who these they is, the conspirators against the Aisenberg.
All right, and Mark, again, that one's going to have to wait till next segment. Give me a minute, folks. I hate these pesky commercials as you do, but they pay the bills. Right back. Hollow Victory continues.
I'm on my way back to our room, and he's still in bed. And the fish tank is making a really, really loud noise, the filter. So I go fiddle with the filter. And then as I turn around, I couldn't make it stop. And as I turned around, I noticed that my laundry room door to the garage is opened. And then I walk closer, and now I'm looking out into the street. So I'm looking right through, my garage, right through my own garage. And I ran to Sabrina's room. I look in her crib and scream. And she's gone. She's not there.
The Aisenbergs on my old daytime program just 4 months after the child disappeared, and Steve is right. There's no way in God's green earth of knowing what happened to this child, whether she's alive or dead, on the hopeful assumption that she is still living and breathing. On your left, the actual photo of the child. On your right, and maybe we could even push in closer, computer-generated, age-appropriate progression of the child. That's what the experts say she would have, or would look like, if she were alive. Obviously, if you've seen this child, please, who do they contact, Steve?
1-800-THE-LOST.
1-800-THE-LOST, okay.
Or if they could go to the Marvel Creations website. Sabrina has a website, and they can pull up that poster so they, too, can get a better look at it and a close-up of it.
Okay, we'll have a close-up before the program is out. 1-800-THE-LOST is probably the easiest way to remember it. Let me formally introduce my guests. In Washington, of course, Steve and Marlene Aisenberg, the couple in the middle of this tragic mystery, join us. Also down in D.C., victims' rights advocate Mark Glass, who became a leading voice for children's safety after the 1993 murder of his daughter Polly. Mark now heads the Class Kids Foundation, reachable on the internet at classkids.org. In Tampa, Barry Cohen, one of Florida's most effective and high-profile attorneys. Barry began representing the Aisenbergs just 3 days after Sabrina's disappearance. A move, incidentally, that caused them considerable criticism. Why did they need a defense attorney, many people said at the time, and continue now to say when they should have been bending over backwards to cooperate with prosecutors. I hope now that is in more perspective for you folks. Joining us from Manhattan, former prosecutor Nancy Grace, barn-burning anchor of Court TV's Trial Heat. Mark, is it there? You admit there is no hard evidence implicating the Aisenbergs in any foul play.
I admit that, but I think there's some very conflicting statements, Geraldo.
All right, but wait, how do you feel when the Judge Pizzo says that the statement on the surveillance tapes that Steve saying to Marlene, "I wish I hadn't harmed her," the judge decided that statement doesn't even exist, that is pure fiction?
Well, Geraldo, you know, the they that have conspired against the Aisenbergs include not only the Hillsborough County Sheriff and the Hillsborough County State's Attorney's Office, but it also includes the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which I've never heard of being a co-conspirator and framing an innocent couple before, and the U.S. State's Attorney, not to mention the grand jury whose question they refused to answer. All of these people reviewed those tapes, all of those entities listened to those tapes, and they all determined that they were valid enough to put before Judge Pizzo. Now, Judge Pizzo has a history as well. Judge Pizzo is an 18-year public defender. So, I mean, you have to put everybody into perspective. I feel that Nancy has hit on a very strong point here.
Which is?
I also, well, that point is that you take all of the hard work, the 4,000 interviews, the 2,000 leads that have been followed up on by the various entities involved in here, the leads in 50 states and 7 countries, which does not tell me that they're focusing in on the parents only. You weigh that against one judge's decision, and I think that you have to take a second look at it. There are also a lot of conflicting statements that have been made by Marlene, made by Steve, and I think that it's just what we heard a minute ago with Steve telling an 8-year-old boy to go look for a child who they believe has been kidnapped in the house. That makes no sense to me, Geraldo. I wouldn't jeopardize another child of mine over something like this. I think that we have to look at what they...
Hold it right there. Let them respond in fairness, Mark.
Okay.
Let Steve and Marlene respond.
Let me respond to that.
I don't think I was jeopardizing William in any way, shape, or form. I asked him to look for Sabrina in case the obscure case that she got out of the crib and was under something, under her crib, in another room of the house.
But Marlene said she was kidnapped, Steve.
Well, she wasn't in the house.
You said she was kidnapped on 911, Marlene.
She was not in her room.
You said my baby's been kidnapped.
You know
That's
what
you said.
You know what, Mark?
Geraldo,
let her answer. Let her answer, everybody. Go ahead.
You know what,
Marlene,
Mark?
is it?
Our purpose here. Our purpose here. We've been defending ourselves for 3 years.
True.
Unfortunately, we were forced to defend ourselves for 3 years. And during that time, valuable time was wasted in looking for our daughter.
You know,
people did not look for our daughter because
I have to
of
say,
the
more
suspicion.
class. I have to say, you know, I've had my suspicions about the Ramseys. I've been pretty consistent. I know they wanted to sue me at one point. They can't because my opinion is my constitutionally protected opinion. I've never quite had the same bad vibe about the Aisenbergs. Isn't it horribly subjective?
Well, maybe it is, Geraldo, but the reality is that I talk to parents in this situation every day of the year. I talk to hundreds of parents, and in fact, there's 3 outcomes in these kinds of situations. You either cooperate with law enforcement and you recover your child, or you cooperate with law enforcement and you don't recover your child, or you don't cooperate with law enforcement, as the Ramseys and the Aisenbergs have not done, and you are left with the cloud hanging over your head.
But Mark, what if Barry Cohen is right? Hold on a second. What if Barry Cohen is right, and you have a hang-in prosecutor who's going after these people? You know, you have a couple of cops now that really do seem to be targets of a misconduct probe. Isn't it possible that in the vast legion of law enforcement you get a couple of bad apples?
Maybe so, but how then does that answer the fact that the photos that were turned over, that were put on billboards, that were put on trucks, that were put on the posters are not pictures of Sabrina? Those were photographs of Monica.
No,
you
they're
can, You can
not. They're
check,
not. Those are pictures of Sabrina, and you can check on it.
I have checked on it.
You know what?
I checked on it today.
I will bet you $1 zillion that is Sabrina. Put up your money on the table. Here's my money. That is Sabrina. And you can't prove it, and I can.
The pictures that you turned over to law enforcement...
Every picture that they got is of Sabrina. The picture that was in question was in People magazine. They put in a picture in their first article that said it was Sabrina when it was really Monica.
Then let's
if you would read this 63-page
so you
ruling, and instead of being force-fed what the police have force-fed you for the past 3 years, and open your mind, if you're such an advocate of victims, then one would think you would be more open-minded and be able to think out of the box and not have a mind of mediocrity.
You know, the victim here is your daughter. The victim is not you, all right?
We were victimized by the police after the fact. We are still victims. William and Monica are victims that they've lost 3 years with their sister. We're victims that we have to wake up every day without our daughter there for us.
I do it too. Believe me, I wake up every day without my daughter as well.
Yeah, but the difference is my daughter's still alive.
Okay, well, here is the picture again. Okay, hold it. Time out. Time out.
Geraldo,
here's the picture again. Hold it, everybody. I want to show you the picture. Here's what we believe, what the experts tell us Sabrina would look like if she is alive. This is the child as she would appear today, snatched in November 1997 from Hillsborough County, Florida, from the home of her parents. That's where her disappearance originated. Hoping that the child is still alive. Please, if you've seen this little kid, 1-800-THE-LOST. Who is that? Is that Barry Cohen wants to speak?
Yeah, I do, Geraldo.
Go ahead.
Geraldo, there's been a lot said by Mark and by Nancy here, but the bottom line is as follows. One, the district attorney's office of this community interviewed all these people, accumulated all of the evidence, and considered all the things that Mark is talking about. Now, with all due respect, Mark hasn't really been involved in the investigation. He's learned a little bit of facts here and there. But the district attorney's office investigated this completely, and they said there is no evidence to establish any probable cause that these 2 people committed any crime whatsoever. Now, the detectives weren't happy. They took this over to Steve Kuntz, the federal office, who is an ambitious prosecutor and wants to make a name on his reputation. And it's not just Judge Pizzo. Judge Meriday, the district judge, he listened to these tapes. He says that they're largely inaudible. We hired Bruce Cohen, who was the head of the FBI lab for 30 years, the head of the engineering section, the audio section, and he listened to all of the allegations in the indictment that the grand jury brought in. And this man is of impeccable integrity, and he can hear absolutely nothing. They played the tapes in open court. None of the reporters could hear anything. There was nothing on those tapes to support any of the allegations. Mr. Kuntz just lied to the United States attorney, got the indictment in, and thought these people were going to cave in. There's no evidence whatsoever. Now, the problem is this. It's not just this case in this country, Geraldo, where you have these detectives lying and the prosecutors lying to the court. I mean, they told the court that they could hear what's on that tape. They couldn't do it. Now, the question that I ask you to consider is how extensive is this problem in this country? How many prosecutors are closing their eyes to the truth, are lying to the courts, are talking about half-truths, which are whole lies? How many detectives are doing what occurred in this case? I say to you that it is a bigger problem in this country. People want to get ahead. They want to win at the expense of justice. And the
Nancy,
Congress of the United States,
Geraldo?
Yeah.
What, Geraldo?
Good. You know, it just seems to me that if you don't have enough money to pay for your own expert to listen to the same tapes, the prosecutor's transcript becomes the fact rather than the opinion.
Well,
and these
I don't,
people
you know, Geraldo, I've
down.
never in my life, after many, many trials and using many, many transcripts, ever handed a jury or a grand jury a set of transcripts without the tapes for them to listen to. The tapes are the original evidence, not the transcripts. And
but you know how
thing,
suggestive a transcript can be when you're listening to muddled surveillance audio. The transcript tells the prosecutor who's presenting the case to the grand jury is the closest thing to God, certainly in that room. He is saying, or she is saying, here's what the tapes say. So you're listening and you're hearing the murmuring, but you're reading, and what you're hearing says blah, 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 and it says you said to fake it.
Right,
My God, you said to fake it. Ah, they're guilty. When in fact the judge says you spoke to David. To me, that's really a cheap trick.
Well, Geraldo, I understand what you're saying, and yes, the grand jury does look up to the prosecutor. They're the ones presenting the evidence, but I don't like a judge making these decisions when it should go to a jury. And another thing, if you notice, Mr. Aisenberg got very angry and very defensive when Mark Kloss brought up the issue of those photos. I didn't see that same passion and that same fire within him defending the night that child went missing. There is something wrong here.
All right, Steve, hold it a second. I'll continue this another segment just so the Aisenbergs can respond. And again, we'll show you the composite photo. Stay tuned. And then in the final segment, we'll talk about Puffy's the closing arguments against the hip-hop mogul, a case that could bring down a multi-million-dollar empire if convicted. Not likely, but possible. Stay tuned.
Where's my baby? It was the most unbelievable thing you could think of, to look in your child's crib and have her gone. It's fright and disbelief, and where could she be? Somebody took my baby. She's just not there.
Marlene Aisenberg on the Today program just a couple of months after Sabrina disappeared in November of 1997, Hillsborough County, Florida. Steve, then I'll go back to Marlene. Mark accuses you and Marlene of misplaced emotion, of, you know, reacting very severely when wrongfully accused of publicizing the wrong photo, and less dramatically or emotionally when discussing the disappearance of the child. I know it is damnably difficult to prove your innocence in this situation. You know, in that sense, you know, I'm not a bleeding heart, but I feel your pain. But how do you respond to Mark and others who criticize too calm here, too hysterical there, etc.?
You know, when you only see a snippet, a 30-second or 5-second snip of somebody, and then you base your opinion off of being uninformed, then you make ridiculous remarks like that. the people that know me know I'm very passionate about trying to bring home our daughter and trying to do everything I can to get her picture out there. I've been doing it for 3 years. I will continue to do it until she comes home. And to us, the most important thing is to bring Sabrina home to us. If you notice in that picture there on the billboard, that is Sabrina sitting in a chair with her name on it. That chair we did not get until after Sabrina was born, and Monica would have been 4 years old and too old to be depicted in that picture.
Yeah, Mark, he's right about that.
You know, Geraldo, I'm talking about the photographs that were on the billboards, the photographs
We
that were
just saw
turned
the
over,
billboard shot, though, Mark.
that were turned over to the National Center for Missing and Exploited
There was a
Children.
foul-up. People magazine did screw up. They did publish the wrong picture.
But you know what? They weren't
and maybe
indicted.
they're getting. Maybe these people are being nailed by
But they weren't indicted for People magazine misidentifying a photograph, and they were indicted for turning over
False
pictures
statement.
of Monica as Sabrina.
Okay. All right.
That was part of the indictment.
Marlene, let me ask you a question, and we hope you're right. And as I ask you, I'll show the picture of what we think Sabrina looks like. And this is the final word on this, and we'll follow up, ladies and gentlemen, follow-up so merited. Why do you think Sabrina is still alive?
Because the state of Florida did the largest search for a body, and they never found one. Nobody would take my baby to hurt her, and I've said that from day one. And they only looked for a body. Now we're asking everybody, if you had a baby come into your family 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, please, family, neighbors, friends, teachers, anybody that sees a child that looks like this age progression, please call 1-800-THE-LOST or look under marvelcreations.com under Missing Baby Sabrina, and you will pull up her picture yourself. We ask for everyone's help.
Good luck, Steve and Marlene. Eisenberg, Nancy, you stay there.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
Cohen,
you.
thanks. Mark, a pleasure as always, my friend. Stay tuned. Puffy Combs, closing arguments, right after this short break.